Good morning. If you have joined us for the first time this morning, we are honored that you have chosen to spend your morning with us, worshiping a God whose love is unconditional and never ends. I am David McLean. I am the youth minister here, and I am honored to stand before you this morning and bring a message from God's Word. And I have not been reminded of the fact that I am getting old more than I have in the last, 5 or 6 days. Thursday, I went to go pick up a box, and I didn't do it right, Ansley. I didn't squat and lift with my legs. I was trying to be lazy, and I bent over to pick the box up, and I went to go stand up, and I felt something in my lower left back, and I said, oh, no, and I ain't been right since then. So if I don't move a whole lot this morning, just know it's because I found a place that I'm comfortable in. Literally, I found a place I'm comfortable. Lots of ibuprofen and Excedrin running through my system right now. But I've also been reminded that I'm getting old because there's some big changes coming to the McLean household. Our oldest turns 18 tomorrow. I know. And she graduates in May. All things that I'm not ready for. But as happens when a birthday rolls around, what do you start doing? You start reminiscing, right? Start thinking about the memories that you have from the last however many years. And there's plenty of them to think about from the last 18 years. And so all these years later, I can still hear her little toddler voice talking to me, a little breathy toddler voice talking. Or I can still hear the girls chanting, Daddy, Dad, as I'm coming up to the front door because they're just excited to see me. There's lots of things that I can remember, but you know what I've realized over the last several months is that no matter how much I remember, there are things that I have forgotten. I like to think that I have kind of a photographic memory. My family rolls their eyes when I say that because I say it a lot, because they like to tell me that's not how something happened, and I'm like, oh, let me tell you. And so when I remember things, I remember details of the room where we were in. Like I can remember the patterns of the curtain or the couch, or I can remember the setting, I can remember the words, I can remember the facial expressions. And so I can recall things. I've always kind of prided myself on that a little bit. But here lately, the girls will start telling me a story. They'll say, Dad, do you remember when? And they start talking, and I just look at them as if I go, I have no idea what you're talking about. And as a matter of fact, Lila just did this the other day. She started telling me a story, and I had a memory that she had, and I had no idea what she was talking about. And ironically, I can't remember what we were talking about when she told me that. Last night I said, Lila, what was that you were in? She goes, I don't know. I'm like, man, I can't even remember what I forgot that you reminded me that I forgot. That irritates me. It infuriates me because I'm supposed to have a great memory, right? Now, sometimes I wonder if they're actually gaslighting me and trying to convince me that something happened that didn't actually happen, because I'm like, I got a good memory. I don't remember that happening. But there are moments in life that you never want to forget. Yes, there are conversations that we have had that I have forgotten. There's interactions that we have that I have forgotten. But there are moments that I will never forget. I will never forget the day that each one of my girls were born. I will never forget the day each one of my girls were baptized. I will never forget moments in life that were pivotal and life-changing, or that had some kind of, I'll never forget, I know this, I will never forget the day that Lila had a conversation with me about what she wanted to do with the rest of her life, because I thought in that moment, I just listened to my baby girl become an adult. And it was pivotal. I know I'll never forget that. But man, there are things that I do forget, no matter how much I don't want to. You know, we remember where we were when something important happened. And you remember the people who were there with you. Yet we forget sometimes some of the more important things. We can remember how we felt. We can remember the details because something about that moment mattered. And yet one of the strange things about human beings is that we can remember a lot of things and still forget the things that matter most. We can remember what somebody said to us 10 years ago, but we can forget what God has done for us. We can remember the disappointment, but forget the deliverance. We can remember the problem, but forget the provision. We can remember the obstacle, but forget the God who carried us through the last one. And that is the theme that is central to Joshua chapters 4, 5, and 6. Travis brought us through the water last week, showing us how Israel was standing on the edge of something that they had not experienced before. They had wandered through the wilderness. They had watched an entire generation die. They have waited, they have wandered, and they have been afraid. And finally, they're standing on the bank of the Jordan River. And the promised land is on the other side. The thing that they had been waiting on, they were looking at it across the other side of the river. But there's that river that stands between them, where they are, and where God has promised to take them. And then God does something remarkable. He stops the river. And Joshua 3 tells us that the priests that were carrying the ark, when they went into the water, they stepped into the Jordan, the waters stopped flowing, and the people crossed on dry ground. Can you imagine being there? I mean, think about it. You've heard the stories of what God did at the Red Sea. And you had heard about the plagues in Egypt, and you heard about the manna in the wilderness. But now you are watching God do something for your generation. The priests are standing in the middle of the river, and the people are walking across on dry ground. And God is bringing them into the promised land. But God knows something about his people, and that is they are quick to forget. And so before they go any farther, God tells Joshua to do something. He tells them to build a memorial. Joshua chapter 4, verses 1 through 3 says, when all the people had crossed the Jordan, the Lord said to Joshua, now choose 12 men, one from each tribe, and tell them, take 12 stones from the very place the priests are standing in the middle of the Jordan, and carry them out and pile them up at the place where you will camp tonight. Well, why stones? Well, because God wanted them to remember. Those stones were going to be a physical reminder of a spiritual reality. They were going to look at those stones and say, God did this. And then it goes on in verses 6 and 7, we will use these stones to build a memorial. In the future, your children will ask you, what do these stones mean? Then you can tell them, they remind us that the Jordan River stopped flowing when the Ark of the Lord's covenant went across. These stones will stand as a memorial among the people of Israel forever. I love that question. What do these mean? You ever seen something from someone else's life, or you hear like a story that someone else is sharing of their experience, and you think, what does that mean? Like what happened there? Like what is this for? What do these stones mean? You see, God was thinking about the next generation. God knew that eventually there would be children who had not been standing in the Jordan. There would be children who had not seen the water stop. There would be children who had not experienced the miracle. So God wanted Israel to build something that would give them an opportunity to tell the story. Now, pay attention, because the stones were not the point. The story was the point. The memorial was not the miracle. The memorial was there to help them remember the miracle. And that gives us a powerful truth for our lives. We need to remember what God has done. Not because God needs us to remember. God doesn't forget what he has done. But instead we need to remember because you are going to forget. Now I know that may seem like, wow, that was really deep, David. Thanks for that. Appreciate it. How much time did you put in preparation for that? Remember, because you will forget. But that is a truth that no matter how hard I try and no matter how hard I don't want to, I'm going to forget. I may remember 60% of the memories and the miracles and the provisions, but I'm probably going to forget the 40%. Probably going to forget 30%. I'm definitely going to forget some of it because I am going to forget. That's why Joshua, when he goes and delivers the message to Israel in verses 21 through 23, he says, in the future, your children will ask, what do these stones mean? Then you can tell them, this is where the Israelites crossed the Jordan on ground. For the Lord your God dried up the river right before your eyes, and he kept it there until you were all across. Just as he did at the Red Sea when he dried it up until we had all crossed over. Notice what Joshua says. He doesn't just tell them about the Jordan. When the kids ask, what does this mean? He doesn't say, just tell them about what happened at the Jordan River. No, he connects the Jordan to the Red Sea. In other words, remember what God did here and remember what God did before. Because for that generation that was not at the Red Sea, it's hard to remember the Red Sea, right? They weren't there when they experienced it. But if they were at the Jordan and they could remember the Jordan, Joshua said that will remind you of the Red Sea. God is building a chain of remembrance. One generation tells another. One miracle points back to another. One act of faithfulness reminds them of another. And why? Because God knows that his people are prone to forget. And Scripture repeatedly warns us about this. Israel had a history of seeing God do something incredible and then quickly acting as if God had never done anything before. You think about in the wilderness when they were hungry. We're hungry. God says, fine, I'll give you manna every morning. I'll give you all that you need for that day. You will never go hungry. And they go, yay. And then like a day later, oh, we're thirsty. How are we going to get water? We're going to thirst to death out here. As if God had not provided all the food they needed that day. Because he knew that his people were quick to forget and act as if God had never done anything before. And so you see this cycle in Israel over and over. They would complain, they would become afraid, they would doubt, they would wonder whether God was really going to provide. And we go, oh man, Israel, you guys were so dumb. And yet we do the same thing. God answers a prayer, and 2 months later we panic about the next problem. God provides when we need it, and then we worry the next time. God carries us through a difficult season, and then when another difficult season comes, we act like we've never experienced his faithfulness. I told Jennifer the other night when I was talking about this sermon, I said, I am kind of tired of getting assigned these topics that smack me in the face while I'm writing them. Now, there's topics that are hard, like just nerve-wracking standing up, and I know that it's going to offend someone, or I know it's going to ruffle some feathers, and so you're just like, I can't sleep at night because I'm worried about this one. And then there's those where it takes forever to write the sermon because you have to stop and go, oh, God, this message is not for Westgate. This message is for me. I had to stop multiple times in every one of these points and go, oh, wow, I have failed there and there and there and there. In 4 weeks, it will be a year since our life was turned upside down. And can I tell you, in the almost year, I am guilty of every single one of these. Where a provision was provided one day, and the next day I am nervous and stressed out about God, how God's going to provide this. As if God didn't do the thing yesterday. As if God didn't take care of the need I had before. As if God hasn't been walking with me and my family every step of the way, every day of our lives. And so I stand before you today saying I have not mastered this whatsoever. And I spent a lot of time this week remembering. And I paused a lot to remember and to recall. Because you see, sometimes forgetting is not a failure of memory, it is a failure of perspective. Can I tell you something? When Jason just stood up here behind this table and said, what would my life look like without his hand on me? I thought, ooh, just offer the invitation and let's go home. Because in my moments of fear and in my moments of doubt and in my moments of wondering, it is with God's hand on me. I'm afraid of how God's going to provide when his hands are on me. Oh, to imagine what life looks like without his hand on me. I got scared. To be afraid of what tomorrow holds with God standing next to me, what would happen if God was not standing next to me? Jason offered me a different perspective this morning. Sometimes forgetting is not a failure of memory. It's not because it wasn't important to me, it's because I have the wrong perspective. We remember the problem more vividly than we remember God's presence. We remember what went wrong more easily than we remember what God did right. We remember the fear more than the faithfulness. That's why remembrance matters. So remember the past, but don't live in the past. Remembering what God has done does not mean living in the past. You see, Israel did not take those stones and stack them up so that they could stay on that side of the Jordan. They did not build that memorial so that they wouldn't move forward. They remembered the past, but they did not live in the past. The stones were a reminder of where God had brought them so that they could move forward with faith. That's important. We don't remember God's faithfulness so that we can sit around and talk about yesterday forever. We remember yesterday so that we can trust God with tomorrow. Yes. The memorial points forward, because you see the Jordan is behind them, but Jericho is in front of them. Yes. Yes. And the God who was faithful yesterday is going to be faithful tomorrow. The God who led them through the Jordan is going to be with them at Jericho. See, sometimes we can make one of two mistakes. We can forget the past completely, or we can live in the past completely. And neither is what God wants. We remember the past because God's faithfulness in the past gives us confidence for the future. Therefore, we can walk confidently and faithfully into it. I don't know what tomorrow will hold. Y'all, I don't even know what this afternoon's going to hold. I don't know what the next 10 minutes will hold. I don't know if I'll ever even step down from this stage and make it back to my seat today. I don't know what anything is going to hold. But I know that if God has been faithful yesterday and the day before and the day before that, and every single day of my life, and I may have gone without what I wanted, but I have never gone without what I needed, If God has been faithful through that, then God is going to be faithful today and tomorrow and the next day and the next day. So God's faithfulness in the past gives us confidence for the future. So remember, because you will forget. But also remember, because you will face new challenges. Joshua 4 happens immediately before Joshua 5 and 6, in case you're not good with math. But Joshua 4 happens before 5 and 6, and 6 is the story that everyone knows. 6 is the story of Jericho. Israel is standing outside Jericho, and God gives them an unusual battle plan. He says, march around the city, and do it again, and again, and again. And on the seventh day, march around it 7 times, and the priests will blow the trumpets, and the people will shout, and the walls will fall, and it is an unusual plan. In fact, it's a ridiculous plan. But Israel obeys. They march. Day after day, round after round. And on the 7th day, they march 7 times. Then Joshua gives the command, and the trumpets sound, and the people shout, and the walls fall. But here's what I want you to notice, that Jericho was not about the walls. It was about whether Israel would trust the God who had already proven himself faithful. Because don't miss the order of events. Before Israel faces Jericho, God reminds them of the Jordan. Because Jericho was unconquerable. Jericho was insurmountable. Jericho was impossible. You would think crossing through the Jordan would be those things as well, but the Jordan was actually simple compared to Jericho. But there was no way around the Jordan. You're right, there wasn't. I mean, push comes to shove, I guess they could have swam the Jordan. But Jericho, there was no way they were going to be able to overcome that. They go through the Jordan, they come to Jericho, and God reminds them of the Jordan. If I could do that, then I got this. Yes. If I could lead you through dry ground, I've got these walls. If I can stop a natural river from flowing, do you not think I can take down some man-made walls? He reminds them of the Jordan so that they would be faithful at Jericho. The God who brought them out of Egypt could bring them into the promised land. The God who had carried them through the wilderness could carry them through this battle. Before they face their next impossible situation, God reminds them of the last impossible situation. That is important. Because sometimes God prepares us for tomorrow by reminding us of yesterday. Again, think about Israel. They had just crossed the Jordan, and now they're looking at Jericho, and it was no small problem. I have to imagine there were some Israelites that were looking at those walls thinking, how are we supposed to do this? There's no way we can get through this. There is no way that we can overcome this. There is no way that we are going to be able to accomplish this. But maybe Joshua could point them back towards the Jordan. Say, you remember? You remember what God just did? Remember when there was a river standing between us and the promise? Remember when there was no human way across? Remember when God stopped the water? Remember those stones? The God who brought you through the Jordan is still the God standing with you at Jericho. And that is the message that I needed to hear, that I believe we all need to hear, because every one of us will face new challenges. There will be new seasons. There will be new decisions. There will be new responsibilities. There will be new disappointments. There will be new fears. And sometimes the next challenge can make us forget the last victory. And we become so focused on what is wrong in front of us that we forget what is behind us. We say, I don't know how I'm going to get through this. And God says, remember? Remember the last time I provided? Remember the time I opened the door? Remember the time I gave you strength? Remember the time I answered your prayer? Remember the time that you thought you couldn't make it and somehow you did? Remember the people that I placed in your life? Remember the ways that I have been faithful? Remember, 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 because God's faithfulness in the past gives us confidence for the future. Yes. That does not mean that tomorrow will be easy. It does not mean God will always solve the problem that we want him, the way we want him to. But it means that we have evidence. We have evidence that God has been faithful before and that God has not changed. See, the problem wasn't whether God was capable. The problem was whether Israel would remember. And sometimes that's our problem too. We know what God has done. But when the next wall appears, we forget. We see the obstacle and forget the God. We see the size of the problem, but forget the size of the God who is with us. We see Jericho and forget the Jordan. So sometimes we need to stop and remember. So how can we do that? Well, first, build your own memorials. Now, obviously, we don't need to go find 12 rocks and stack them up in the backyard. I mean, unless that works for you, you can do that. But the principle is worth carrying with us. Find ways to remember what God has done. I brought this jar. Ooh, this is going to hurt. I brought this. There's a top there, but I left it down there. This is our family memorial jar that sits in our schoolroom at home. And there's a whole, like you look at it and go, that just looks like a trash bucket to me. Lots of papers, lots of, but then like last night I pulled it out and I started looking at some of the stuff. And so Lila finds this and she just kind of started giggling. This is the mask she got when she started working at Chick-fil-A almost 2 years ago. So then we start talking about stories of her working at Chick-fil-A or when she started working there and start thinking about how far she's come in 2 years being employed there versus the day she started. Let's see, what else we pull out of here? We pulled the Kane concert that we went to with the youth group here in town. We start thinking about the memories that came along with that, the songs that we heard, the experiences that we had. Let's see what else. We've got dinner tickets from Impact. That's important to our youth, but also it's important to our family. Been there forever. Let's see what else was in here. I pulled this out last night and I said, why do we have a ticket for the Dothan High graduation of 2025? And they said, oh, who graduated last year? And then we started thinking about, that was Ethan. And we started naming the people we went to go see, and then we started talking about that graduation. I was like, oh, okay, now we're starting to remember some of the things that we were not thinking about. At the bottom? Oh, look at that. It's the Winterfest. Hey, Dudley, Winterfest. Now, we actually didn't go to this. Lyle and Grayson went to this with another group this past winter, but they have all kinds of stories and memories. We pulled out, they're like, oh, look at that Winterfest. Why don't I want to go to the bottom? Who told me to go to the bottom? You want me to keep pulling stuff out to remember further? What 3D movie was this? Don't remember. I don't remember. See? Huh? Oh, no, that was the eclipse. That's right. Yeah, that was the eclipse class. Oh, it says visisolar. Yeah. See? Memory. What birthday was this? This was your birthday we celebrated in the youth room. 14th? 15th? 15th? These were little poppers that we put in the youth room and all of the group got together. Huh? 15, so 3 years ago. And this stays in our jar because that was a memory that she was very important to her, that she celebrated with her group. Let's see. A toy from the Minecraft Happy Meal, where we went as a youth group to watch the Minecraft movie, where Clara and Sophia danced in the McDonald's, jumping up and down, chanting Shrimus or something. I can't remember what it was. It was insane. The people there were looking at us like we had lost our minds. All these memories in here. I mean, I could stand here and keep pulling them out, and most I would remember, some I would not. Christ died for you, Lila. That is Easter. Oh, look at that. This is our jar. It stays there. And every so often we'll come and just drop things in there, whether it's a movie ticket or whether it's something from a youth event or something that matters to us. Something that means something to us. It doesn't have to mean something as a whole family. It could mean something to just Grayson or just Clara and mean nothing to me. But that's okay because when we pull it out, we're having a conversation. What's this from? What does this have to do with anything? That's just one way that we have built a memorial, because a lot of those conversations, the Minecraft movie, what's that got to do with Jesus? What's that got to do with what God has done? Well, there's a chain of events you have to get to, but it reminds us that my girls and my family have been blessed with an incredible youth group. And it brings up memories of the time spent with all of the teenagers. And suddenly you're starting to talk about this trip and this class and that class and this relationship. And you start remembering that God has surrounded you with some incredible people who have pointed you towards Jesus. All because you went to go see an annoying Minecraft movie.
That's good. Yes, sir.
Build your own memorial. Maybe it's a journal. You don't have to do a big giant jar. Y'all, I was carrying this jar this morning, and there's this brief moment where I thought, if I drop this jar, Jennifer's going to kill me. Because that was an expensive jar, one. But all those memories in there. So you don't have to do a jar. Maybe you don't have anywhere to put in your house a jar. Maybe it's a journal. Maybe it's writing down prayers and recording when God answers them. Maybe it's keeping a list of things you're thankful for. That's one of the things that has made the last several months a little more bearable is someone told me, keep a gratitude list. Write down the things that you're grateful for. Then that turned into writing down the prayers that were answered and how God answered them. And then that turned into adding something every week to that list. And I think I have 60-something things on this list. And honestly, I sometimes just forget to add them. There could be more. But maybe it's a list of things that you're thankful for. Maybe it's taking pictures. I don't know about y'all, but we have thousands of pictures on external hard drives, on printed out albums. We did videos when the girls were babies, and we go back and we watch those videos of pictures. Like we have pictures on pictures on pictures. Maybe it's writing down significant moments in your faith. Maybe it's telling stories around the dinner table. Maybe it's simply taking time every once in a while to stop and say, let me think about how God has brought me this far. Because there will be moments when you need to remember. There will be moments when you're sitting in a difficult doctor's appointment. There will be moments when you're wondering what you're supposed to do next. There will be moments when a relationship falls apart. There will be moments when you don't know how you're going to handle school or work or family or the future. And in those moments, you need something that can remind you that God has been faithful. You need your own stones. Not objects of worship, not lucky charms, not magical reminders, just tangible ways to remember the faithfulness of God. So build your own memorials and tell the story to the next generation. There is another reason that God wanted Israel to remember. It was not only for them, it was for their children and for their children's children. When God says to Joshua, in the future your children will ask, that means that God expected Israel to tell the story. The children were not expected to magically know what the stones meant. Somebody had to tell them. Let me tell you something. Let me tell you a story of how God provided. Let me tell you about Egypt. Let me tell you about the Red Sea. Let me tell you about the wilderness. Let me tell you about the manna. Let me tell you about the Jordan. Let me tell you what God did and how God brought us here. And that is one of the responsibilities we have as God's people. We have to tell the story. We cannot automatically assume the next generation will know. We cannot assume our children will somehow inherit our faith without hearing about our faith. We have to tell them. Me and my wife lived a whole life full of experiences before our children ever came along. I mean, we traveled, we went and saw things, we tell stories now. And then before Jennifer and I got married, we each had individual lives full of stories before we even ever got married. Even now, all these years later, we will tell a story about our family or our history, and the girls will say, our family lore is ridiculous. I'm like, I know, it's great, isn't it? Like, we have some crazy people we're related to. There's some crazy stories out there. But we tell them the stories. They don't just automatically know them. Some stories I will start telling. I'm like, yeah, I probably told you that. And Lila and Grayson will be like, I've never heard that story before in my life. I'm like, what, really? And so I start telling them about that. See, we have to tell them the stories. We have to tell them about how God has been faithful in our lives, and tell them about prayers that God answered, and tell them about prayers God did not answer. Tell them about doors that God opened, and tell them about doors that God closed. Tell them about seasons when you didn't know what was going to happen, but God carried you through. Tell them about the moments when you failed, but God gave you grace. Tell them about the times when you were afraid and God gave you courage. Tell them about the times when you did not understand what God was doing, but later saw his faithfulness. Tell the story, because somebody needs to know. And maybe one of the most important things that you give the next generation is not another possession. It is not something that you held on to and passed on to them after you died. It is not necessarily a piece of advice. Maybe one of the greatest gifts you can give is a testimony. Let me tell you what God has done. And y'all, I'm going to branch it out just a little bit further and say it's not even about just telling the children that live in my home the story of what God has done. Because there are kids sitting all throughout this crowd that need to know the story of what God has done in your life. There are people who need to hear the faithfulness in the lives of someone else they don't live with. Honestly, they'll probably listen to your story more than they will their parents' story. And they need to hear a story from someone else besides their youth minister, because they hear him yap all the time. There are people who can benefit from your story. And then let's branch it out a little bit further, that it's not just children sitting in this room that need to hear your story, but there are people sitting in this room that I would venture to say have no idea where they are headed in life. They are lost, they are confused, they are filled with fear, they are filled with doubt. I bet there's someone sitting here this morning that's not even sure God is real. And if he is real, they're not sure that they even buy into the whole thing anyways. There are people who are going through loss. There are people who are going through struggles. There are people who are going through dark times right now that they need to hear your story. Yes. One of the things that people have said to me over and over the last 11 months is, you don't know the testimony that your family is being to other people. And I have said back to them, that's great. I want to stop being the testimony for a little while. Can someone else be the testimony, please? Because I just want 5 minutes of just not being in a fishbowl. You know what I mean? Yeah. But guess what? I don't get to control that. Amen. I don't get to control what happens in my life. I don't get to control what happens to my family. I don't get to control the things that life throws at me. And so I walk faithfully, and I remember what God has done, because I remember, therefore he will be there the next step and the next step and the next step. And then I tell the story, so that someone else sitting in this crowd, or someone sitting in that youth room, or someone at Walmart, or someone at Target, sorry Carol, I know you don't do Walmart, someone at Target, someone that I interact with, someone needs to hear that story. So tell your testimony, tell your story. And ultimately for Christians, all of our remembering leads back to one place, and it's Jesus. Because the greatest act of God's faithfulness wasn't the Jordan River. It wasn't the Red Sea. It wasn't Jericho. It's the cross. And see, at the cross, God demonstrated his love and faithfulness in the clearest way possible. That Jesus came for us. That Jesus gave himself for us. That Jesus died for us. And Jesus rose again. And when Christians gather around the Lord's Supper, we are doing exactly what Joshua was teaching Israel to do. See, when Jesus says, do this in remembrance of me, we got to ask the question, why? Why does Jesus say, do this in remembrance of me? Well, it's because Jesus also knows that we forget. We get distracted. We get discouraged. We get overwhelmed. We need to remember. Remember the cross. Remember the empty tomb. Remember the grace. Remember the forgiveness. Remember the love of God. And remember that your story isn't ultimately about how strong you are. It's about how faithful God is. I want you to imagine Israel one more time. They've crossed the Jordan River. Joshua tells them to take 12 stones, and they take it, one from each tribe. And they carry those stones to their camp, and they pile them together. Maybe they're dirty. Maybe they're ordinary. Maybe no one would look at those stones and think they were special. But every stone tells a story. One says, God brought us through. Another says, God kept his promise. Another says, God was faithful. Another stone says, God made a way when there wasn't a way. Another says, God brought us here. And eventually a child walks by. And she looks at that pile. And she asks the question, what do those stones mean? And someone gets the opportunity to say, let me tell you a story. Let me tell you about what God has done. Maybe we need to do the same thing. Maybe we need to stop for a moment and look back. Look at your life. Look at where you've been. Look at the moments that you thought you wouldn't make it. Look at the prayers you've prayed. Look at the doors God opened. Look at the people God placed in your life. Look at the times that God gave you strength. Look at the moments that God provided. Look at the times that God forgave you. Look at the times God gave you another chance. And remember, because life is not always easy. Not every prayer gets answered exactly the way we want. Not because we will never face another Jordan, not because we will never see another Jericho, but remember, because God has been faithful. And the same God who was faithful then is faithful now. So when you're afraid, remember. When you're discouraged, remember. When you're facing something you don't understand, remember. When the walls seem too high, remember. When the river seems too wide, remember. And when you don't know who holds tomorrow, remember. Remember what God has done. And then step forward. Because the God who brought you this far, not finished with you yet. If you need the prayers or support or encouragement of this congregation, we have an invitation every week. You can come forward and the elders will meet you and pray with you. Or we have a prayer team that is always in the back, starting now and after service, that can stop and pray with you. But if there's something you need prayers about, is there something you need to help remembering, something you're going through that we can hold you up and encourage you? If there's any way we can serve you, let us know as together we stand and sing.
Blessed